The blood on Florence Bancroft's hands was still wet when she told the sheriff exactly who had killed her father. And the entire town of Marfa, Texas, fell silent as she pointed directly at the mayor's son standing 3 feet away. It was August 1878, and the merciless sun beat down on the dusty Main Street, where her father's body lay crumpled outside the general store. Florence had been inside purchasing flour when she heard the gunshot, had run outside to find her father gasping his last breaths, his eyes fixing on the figure disappearing around the corner. He had whispered a name with his dying breath, and Florence would not dishonor him by keeping silent. She was 22 years old, and in that moment, she chose truth over safety. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, his weathered face creasing with worry lines that had nothing to do with justice. Mayor Caldwell pushed through the gathering crowd, his face already red with indignation before he even heard the accusation. His son, Richard, stood near the saloon entrance, his right hand still trembling, gunpowder residue likely still on his fingers if anyone cared to check. "Miss Bancroft, you are understandably distraught," the sheriff began, his voice careful, measured. "Perhaps you should rest before making such serious claims." "I am not distraught enough to lie," Florence said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "My father told me it was Richard Caldwell. He saw him clearly. And I saw Richard running from this spot not 30 seconds after the shot." The crowd murmured, a dangerous sound like wind before a storm, but it was not support that Florence heard in those voices. It was disapproval, directed at her. Ladies did not make such accusations. Ladies did not speak so boldly in public. Ladies certainly did not contradict men of power, even when their fathers lay murdered in the street. That is a damnable lie. Richard Caldwell shouted, but his voice cracked, and he would not meet Florence's eyes. Mayor Caldwell stepped forward, his bulk imposing, his voice booming with authority. "My son was with me all afternoon, going over the town's financial records. Miss Bancroft is clearly hysterical with grief. Sheriff, escort her home before she embarrasses herself further." Florence felt hands on her arms, gentle but firm, trying to guide her away. She pulled free, kneeling beside her father's body, her dress soaking up his blood. "I will not be silenced. I will not pretend I did not see what I saw, hear what I heard. My father deserves justice." "Your father was a drunk who probably owed money to half the territory," Mayor Caldwell said coldly. "My condolences on your loss, but do not drag my family's name through the mud with your wild accusations." Florence looked up at him, her green eyes blazing. "My father never touched liquor after my mother died 6 years ago. You know that. This whole town knows that. But you would rather believe a comfortable lie than an uncomfortable truth." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some people looked away. Others whispered behind their hands. Florence saw it all, saw the truth of her situation crystallizing before her. She could tell the truth and be ostracized, or she could stay silent and be accepted. There was no middle ground in Marfa, Texas. There never had been. A voice cut through the tension, deep and measured, with an edge like a well-honed blade. "The lady has a right to speak her truth, Mayor, and the dead man has a right to justice." Florence turned to see a man she had noticed around town over the past few weeks, but had never spoken to. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of weathered leather. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pushed back on his head, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. Not threatening, but not harmless either. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Mayor Caldwell said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You would do well to remember you are new to this town." "Wade Brennan," the cowboy said, not backing down an inch. And I have been here long enough to know that your son spends most afternoons at the card tables, not in your office. I was in the saloon when Miss Bancroft's father was shot. I saw Richard Caldwell come in 30 seconds later, sweating like he had been running, his hand shaking so bad he could barely hold his whiskey glass. The crowd's murmur changed pitch. This was a man speaking, a man who clearly knew his way around trouble. His words carried weight that Florence's could not, simply because of what hung between his legs. The injustice of it burned in her chest, but she also felt a flicker of hope. Mayor Caldwell's face went from red to purple. You would take the word of a hysterical woman and a drifter over my family's reputation. I would take the word of truth over any reputation, Wade Brennan said quietly. But I understand this town might not be ready for that conversation. The sheriff stepped between them, his hand raised. Everyone calm down. We will investigate this matter properly. Richard, you will come with me to answer some questions. Miss Bancroft, you will need to give a full statement. Wade Brennan, you as well. The rest of you go about your business. This street needs to be cleared. Florence watched as Richard Caldwell was led away, his father blustering beside him, already talking about lawyers and false accusations. She felt numb, exhausted, and suddenly aware that she was kneeling in her father's blood. Someone brought a blanket to cover his body. Gentle hands, finally, helped her to her feet. Those hands belonged to Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house on the edge of town. She was one of the few Chinese families left after the railroad work had dried up, and she knew what it meant to be an outsider. "Come, child," she said softly. "You cannot stay here." "I will not leave him alone," Florence whispered. "The undertaker is coming. Your father will be treated with respect, but you need to clean up, change your dress. You need to be ready for what comes next." What came next was worse than the murder itself in some ways. The town turned on Florence with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. By the next morning, stories circulated that her father had been drunk, that he had been gambling, that he had been in debt. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than convenience. The mayor had influence, money, and power. Florence had only her word. The sheriff conducted an investigation that lasted all of 2 days before declaring there was insufficient evidence to charge Richard Caldwell. The gunpowder residue had been washed away. The witnesses who might have seen something suddenly remembered being elsewhere. Even Wade Brennan's testimony was dismissed as the observations of a newcomer who might have been mistaken about the timing. Florence buried her father in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Marfa. Fewer than 10 people attended the funeral. Mrs. Chen came, and old Mr. Rodriguez, who had been her father's friend for 30 years. A few others who were either too old or too poor to care about the mayor's disapproval. And Wade Brennan, standing at a respectful distance, his hat in his hands. After the service, as Florence stood alone by the fresh grave, Wade approached carefully. "Miss Bancroft, I am sorry I could not do more." She looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the strong jaw, the kind eyes, the way he held himself with quiet confidence. "You did more than anyone else. You told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. I will not forget that. Truth is all I have," he said simply. "My father taught me that a man without honesty is just a shell walking around, empty inside. I figure it applies to women too." Despite everything, Florence almost smiled. "You figure correctly." They stood in silence for a moment, the hot wind carrying dust across the cemetery. Finally, Wade spoke again. "What will you do now?" "I honestly do not know," Florence admitted. "My father and I lived in a small house on the edge of town. We had some savings, enough for a few months, but I am not welcome in polite society anymore. I spoke too boldly, made too many accusations. Ladies are supposed to be delicate flowers who faint at the sight of blood, not women who kneel in it and demand justice. You sound bitter. I am bitter. My father is dead, his killer walks free, and I am treated like a pariah for telling the truth. Yes, I am bitter. Wade nodded slowly. You have that right, but bitterness is like poison. It will kill you from the inside if you let it. What would you have me do? Smile and pretend everything is fine? No, Wade said firmly. I would have you keep being exactly who you are. Too honest for polite society, maybe. But honesty is the foundation worth building upon. Everything else is just sand that shifts in the wind. Florence met his eyes, saw genuine respect there, and something else she could not quite name. You barely know me. How can you say such things? I know enough. I know you loved your father enough to risk everything for his memory. I know you have courage most men would envy. I know you value truth over comfort. That tells me plenty. Before Florence could respond, a commotion from the cemetery entrance drew their attention. A group of women from the town's social circle stood there, led by Mrs. Caldwell herself, the mayor's wife. They were dressed in their finest, expressions of practiced sympathy on their faces that did not reach their eyes. Miss Bancroft, Mrs. Caldwell called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We came to offer our condolences and our assistance in your time of need. Florence walked toward them, aware of Wade following a few steps behind. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. That is very kind. We understand you are quite alone now, Mrs. Caldwell continued. And we worry about a young woman in your position making rash decisions, saying things she might later regret. There it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the demand for silence packaged as care. I have said nothing I regret, Florence said clearly. Mrs. Caldwell's smile tightened. Grief can make us say and do things that are not in our best interest. We want to help you, dear. There is a position available at the dress shop, and we could arrange for you to take a room at the boarding house. All you need to do is acknowledge that you were mistaken in your earlier statements. A simple misunderstanding brought on by shock and grief. Everyone would understand. Florence felt her hands clench into fists. They were offering her a way back, a chance to rejoin polite society, to have a livelihood and a place in the community. All she had to do was call her father a liar, betray his dying words, and let his murderer go unpunished. No, she said simply. The women's expressions shifted from false sympathy to genuine disapproval. You are being very foolish, Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice hardening. You have no family, no prospects. You need the goodwill of this community. I need my integrity more, Florence said. I will not lie to make anyone more comfortable. Then you will find yourself very uncomfortable indeed, Mrs. Caldwell said coldly. Do not expect any help from decent society when you have rejected every olive branch extended to you. As the women turned to leave, Wade stepped forward. Miss Bancroft will not need your conditional charity, ladies. Some of us value honesty over social games. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes raked over him with contempt. A drifter cowboy defending a fallen woman. How perfectly appropriate. After they left, Florence felt the weight of what she had just done settle on her shoulders. She had burned the last bridge, rejected the final chance at normalcy. She was truly alone now. I should not have spoken for you, Wade said quietly. That was your choice to make. You spoke the truth, Florence said. I am learning that is more rare and valuable than I ever realized. Over the next few weeks, Florence discovered just how thoroughly polite society could shun someone who refused to play by their rules. The general store suddenly ran out of items whenever she tried to purchase them. The boarding house had no vacancies, despite empty rooms. Women crossed the street to avoid greeting her. Men looked through her as if she did not exist. The only exceptions were those who existed on the margins themselves. Mrs. Chen brought her food and refused payment. Mr. Rodriguez checked on her house, making small repairs without being asked. And Wade Brennan, who seemed to find reasons to be wherever she was, a quiet presence that asked nothing but offered everything. He worked on various ranches around Marfa, breaking horses, mending fences, doing the hard work that kept the cattle business running. He was good at his job, respected by the men he worked with, even if the town's elite looked down on him. And every few days, he would stop by Florence's small house with some excuse. He needed to check if her roof was secure before the fall rains. Her fence needed mending. He had extra vegetables from a ranch that would just go to waste. Florence knew what he was doing, and her pride warred with her gratitude. She did not want to be a charity case, but she also could not deny that his help made survival possible. Her savings were dwindling faster than expected, and finding work proved impossible. No one would hire the woman who had accused the mayor's son of murder. One evening in late September, as the brutal heat finally began to ease, Wade arrived with a string of fish and the presumption that he would cook them for her. Florence tried to protest, but he was already cleaning them at her outdoor wash station, his movements efficient and practiced. "You cannot keep doing this," she said, leaning against the doorframe of her small house. "Doing what? Catching more fish than I can eat. That seems like a practical problem with a practical solution. You know what I mean, helping me, bringing me things. The town already talks about me like I am a fallen woman. If they see you here constantly, they will assume the worst." Wade looked up from the fish, his expression serious. "Let them assume whatever they want. I stopped caring about gossip a long time ago. But I care. I care that you are risking your reputation for me." "I have no reputation to risk," Wade said bluntly. "I am a drifter, a cowboy who will move on eventually, but you are right that we should talk about this properly." He washed his hands and stood, facing her directly. "I come here because I want to, because I admire you, because when I look at you, I see someone who chose truth when everyone else chose comfort, and that matters to me. My father was murdered when I was 16, killed by a man who was never brought to justice because he had money and influence. I understand what you are going through in ways most people cannot." Florence felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared pain. "I did not know. I am sorry. It was a long time ago. But it taught me that truth and justice do not always align, and that standing up for what is right often costs more than people want to pay. You paid that price without hesitation. That is rare, or stupid," Florence said quietly. "No, brave. But bravery does not keep you fed or housed. So I have a proposal, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Florence raised an eyebrow, waiting. "There is a ranch about 15 miles north of here, the Rocking M. It is owned by a man named Marcus Webb, and he is looking for a housekeeper and cook. He is old, cantankerous, and most women refuse to work for him because he speaks his mind without polish. But he pays fair wages and does not give a damn about Marfa's social politics." "You want me to be a housekeeper," Florence said, not sure how she felt about that. "I want you to have options," Wade corrected. "I know you have no money. I know you will lose this house soon if something does not change. This is work, honest work with a man who will judge you on your cooking and cleaning, not your willingness to lie for social acceptance." Florence considered it. Pride told her to refuse, to insist she would find her own way. Practicality told her that pride would not pay for food or shelter. "Why are you doing this?" Wade was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth helping, and maybe, if you are willing, worth courting properly." The words hung in the air between them. Florence felt her heart beat faster, a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "You want to court me, the town pariah, the woman no respectable person will associate with. I want to court Florence Bancroft, who loved her father enough to risk everything, who stands by truth even when it costs her, who has more courage in her little finger than most men have in their entire body. Yes, that is the woman I want to court." Florence felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I barely know you." "Then let us change that. Take the job at the Rockingham. I work there sometimes, helping with the horses. We will see each other regularly. We can talk, get to know each other properly. And if you decide I am not worth your time, I will accept that and leave you alone. But give it a chance. Give us a chance." Florence looked at this man who had appeared in her life at its darkest moment, who had stood up for truth when no one else would, who saw value in her honesty rather than shame. She thought about her options, which were essentially this or destitution. But more than that, she thought about how she felt when he was near. "Safe, seen, valued, all right," she said finally. "I will take the job and I will give you a chance, but I will not lie or pretend to be someone I am not, even for you." Wade smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "I would not want you any other way." 2 days later, Wade drove Florence to the Rockingham in a borrowed wagon, her few possessions packed in the back. The ranch house was weathered but solid, set against a backdrop of rolling hills and endless sky. Marcus Webb turned out to be a man in his late 60s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that missed nothing. "So you are the girl who caused all that ruckus in town," he said by way of greeting. "Yes, sir," Florence said, refusing to look away from his scrutiny. "Told the truth and got punished for it, from what I hear." "Yes, sir." "Good. I cannot stand liars. My last housekeeper stole from me for 6 months before I caught her. You steal from me, girl, and I will make sure you regret it. But you work honest, keep this place clean, cook decent food, and we will get along fine." "Understood, understood, sir." Marcus looked at Wade. "You vouch for her." "With my life," Wade said without hesitation. "That is good enough for me. Her quarters are in the back, separate entrance. She gets Sundays off and $20 a month. She breaks anything expensive, it comes out of her wages." Florence almost gasped. $20 a month was more than she had expected, more than most housekeepers made. "That is very generous, sir." "It is fair," Marcus corrected. "I expect a lot of work for that money. This place is a mess. I have been batching it for 3 months and I am tired of my own cooking. You earn every penny, I promise you that." He was not wrong. The ranch house was indeed a mess, with months of accumulated dust, dirty dishes, and general disorder. But Florence threw herself into the work with determination. She had been raised by a father who believed women should be capable and strong, who had taught her to work hard and take pride in her accomplishments. She cleaned that house from top to bottom, organized the kitchen, and prepared meals that made even taciturn Marcus grunt with approval. Wade came by the ranch 3 or 4 times a week, working with the horses in the breaking pen or helping mend fences. He always found time to talk to Florence, brief conversations at first, gradually growing longer. They talked while she prepared meals, while she worked in the vegetable garden, while she sat on the porch in the evening with mending in her lap. He told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his father who had been a circuit judge, about the cattle rustler who had shot his father in cold blood, and was never convicted because the local sheriff was in on the scheme. He told her about the years he spent drifting, unable to settle, carrying his anger and grief like stones in his pockets. "What changed?" Florence asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. "I got tired," Wade admitted. "Tired of being angry, tired of moving." I realized my father would not want me to waste my life on bitterness. He lived for truth and justice, and the best way to honor him was to do the same wherever I was. Is that why you spoke up for me? In memory of your father, Wade looked at her, his expression soft. No. I spoke up for you because it was right, but maybe my father's memory made me brave enough to do it. Florence felt something warm bloom in her chest. She had never met a man who spoke so openly about his feelings, who did not hide behind bravado or false strength. Do you miss him? Every day. But missing him is better than forgetting him. The pain reminds me he was real, that his life mattered. Yes, Florence whispered. I understand that. They sat in comfortable silence, the evening sounds of the ranch settling around them. It was Marcus who finally broke the moment, calling from inside that he needed his medicine. Florence rose to attend to him, but not before Wade caught her hand briefly. I am glad you are here, he said simply. So am I, Florence replied, and meant it. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and fall gave way to the sharp cold of a Texas winter. Florence settled into the rhythm of ranch life, finding a peace she had not expected. The work was hard but satisfying. Marcus was gruff but fair, and she grew fond of his blunt observations and dry humor. And Wade became a constant presence, someone she looked forward to seeing, whose absence left a noticeable void. They courted slowly, properly, with Marcus as an unofficial chaperone who made pointed comments about young people these days, whenever he caught them sitting too close. Wade brought Florence small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers pressed between pages. She mended his clothes, packed him extra food when he had long days working the range, and listened to his dreams of someday having his own small ranch. It was in December, during a cold snap that frosted the ground every morning, that things changed. Wade had been away for a week, helping move cattle to winter pasture. When he returned, he found Florence in the barn, tending to one of the horses that had gone lame. You missed me? He asked, leaning against the stall door. Terribly, Florence admitted, because she had learned that honesty worked both ways in courtship. The days are longer when you are not here. Wade entered the stall, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. I thought about you constantly. About this moment, being able to see you again. Florence looked up at him, her heart racing. Wade. I love you, he said, the words simple and devastating. I have loved you since the day you knelt in blood and demanded justice when everyone else demanded silence. I love your courage and your honesty and the way you refuse to bend even when the whole world pushes against you. I love who you are, Florence Bancroft. Tears spilled down Florence's cheeks. I love you too. I did not expect to, did not think I had room in my heart for anything but grief and anger. But you made space for yourself with your kindness and your truth. I love you. Wade cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was Florence's first kiss, and it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Marry me, Wade said. I know I do not have much to offer yet. I am still just a cowboy working for wages, but I am saving money and I am honest and I will love you faithfully all my days. Marry me, Florence. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They told Marcus that evening, expecting some gruff comment or complaint about losing his housekeeper. Instead, the old man smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. About time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. You have my blessing for what it is worth. It is worth everything, Florence said, hugging him impulsively. Thank you for giving me a place here, for treating me with respect when no one else would. You earned respect, Marcus said gruffly. Now, when is this wedding happening? I suppose I will need to clean up and wear my good suit. They decided on a simple ceremony in early February at the small church in Marfa. Florence knew the town would talk, knew that her marriage to a cowboy would be seen as exactly what they expected from a fallen woman. But she found she did not care anymore. Let them talk. She was marrying a man who valued truth and love over social standing, and that was worth more than all the approval in the world. What she did not expect was the confrontation that came a week before the wedding. She had traveled into Marfa to purchase fabric for a simple wedding dress, accompanied by Wade. They were leaving the general store when Richard Caldwell appeared, clearly drunk despite the early hour. "Well, look at this," he slurred. "The crazy woman who accused me of murder and her cowboy savior. How touching." Wade stepped between them, his posture protective but not aggressive. "Walk away, Caldwell. Or what? You will shoot me, have me arrested." Richard laughed bitterly. "You have no power here, neither of you do. My father runs this town." "Your father protects a murderer," Florence said clearly, unable to stay silent. "And everyone knows it, even if they pretend they do not." Richard's face twisted with something that might have been guilt or might have been rage. "Your father was a nobody. He did not matter. He got in my way, threatened to tell people about my debts, about the money I owed. He was going to ruin me." The words fell into the street like stones, and suddenly several people who had been passing by stopped, listening. Richard was too drunk to realize what he was admitting, too lost in his own self-pity to guard his words. "So you shot him," Florence said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You murdered him because he threatened to tell the truth about you. He was going to destroy my life." Richard shouted, "I had no choice." "There is always a choice," Wade said quietly. "You chose wrong." The sheriff appeared then, drawn by the commotion. He looked old, tired, and ashamed. "Richard Caldwell, I am afraid you need to come with me." "What? Why? I did not do anything." The drunken bravado was fading, replaced by fear. "You just confessed to murder in front of a dozen witnesses," the sheriff said heavily. "I may have been willing to look the other way before, God help me, but I cannot ignore this." Richard tried to run, but Wade moved faster, catching him easily and holding him until the sheriff could apply handcuffs. Mayor Caldwell arrived moments later, his face ashen as he heard what his son had admitted. For once, his bluster was gone. "I will get you the best lawyers," he told Richard. "We will fight this." "You can try," the sheriff said. "But a confession is a confession, especially with this many witnesses. The judge will not ignore it." Florence watched as Richard was led away, feeling strangely empty. She had wanted justice for her father, had fought for it when everyone told her to stay silent. And now she had it, accidentally, because a guilty man could not live with his conscience and alcohol had loosened his tongue. It did not feel like victory. It felt like waste. Her father was still dead, and a young man would likely hang for his crimes. Wade put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," Florence admitted. "I wanted him to face consequences. But now that it is happening, I just feel sad. Sad for my father, sad for what Richard Caldwell could have been if he had made different choices." "That is because you have a good heart," Wade said gently. "Justice is necessary, but it is never sweet, not when it comes at such a cost." They left Marfa quickly, returning to the ranch. Marcus listened to the story with his usual quiet attention, then nodded slowly. "You did right, speaking truth from the start. Took 7 months, but truth came out anyway. Truth usually does, eventually. The question is whether we have the courage to stand by it while we wait." The trial happened in March after Florence and Wade were married. It was swift, as such things went. Richard Caldwell was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang. His father resigned as mayor in disgrace. The town moved on, as towns do, finding new scandals to whisper about. Florence did not attend the hanging. She had said her truth, had seen justice served, and that was enough. She did not need to witness death to find closure. Instead, she and Wade spent that day at her father's grave, bringing fresh flowers and sitting in quiet remembrance. "He would have liked you," Florence said, laying her hand over Wade's. "My father valued honesty above all things. He would have respected what you did, how you stood up when no one else would." "I wish I could have met him," Wade said. "Any man who raised a daughter like you must have been remarkable." They sat in silence, the spring wind gentle around them, carrying the scent of new growth. It felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. Life at the Rockingham settled into a comfortable pattern. Wade and Florence lived in a small cabin on the property that Marcus helped them build, close enough to the main house that Florence could still fulfill her duties as housekeeper, but far enough to give them privacy as newlyweds. Marcus even raised Wade's wages and gave him a small share in the ranch's profits, saying that good men who married honest women deserved to build something lasting. Florence loved being married, loved the intimacy of sharing life with someone who valued her completely. Wade was patient and kind, passionate and devoted. They talked about everything, from the philosophical to the mundane, building a foundation of trust and honesty that felt unshakable. When they disagreed, which was rarely, they worked through it with words, never letting anger fester into resentment. It was in the summer of 1879, a year after her father's death, that Florence discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening as they sat on their cabin's small porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Wade's face transformed with joy, tears actually springing to his eyes. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Yes, sometime in January, I think." He pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as if she might break. "I promise I will be a good father. I will teach our child about truth and honor, about standing up for what is right. I will love them as fiercely as I love you." "I know you will," Florence said, feeling complete in a way she had never imagined possible. "We will raise them together to be brave and honest and kind." Marcus was predictably gruff about the news, but Florence saw the pleasure in his eyes. "Babies are noisy and messy," he complained. "I suppose I will have to get used to it." "You suppose correctly," Florence said, kissing his weathered cheek. "And you will make a wonderful grandfather figure, whether you like it or not." The pregnancy progressed without complications, though Florence continued working until Marcus and Wade both insisted she needed to rest more. She spent her final months preparing the cabin for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, reading books about infant care. Wade added a room onto the cabin, working late into the evenings to ensure it was finished before the baby arrived. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1880 with Mrs. Chen attending as midwife and Wade pacing outside until the baby's first cry brought him running. They named him James after Florence's father, and Wade cried as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Wade whispered, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "Thank you, Florence. Thank you for giving me this." Florence was exhausted but happy, watching her husband bond with their child. "We made him together. This is our family, Wade, built on truth and love and all the things that matter." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Florence had anticipated. James was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Marcus doted on him shamelessly, his gruff exterior melting whenever the baby was near. Wade was a devoted father, rising for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and talking to him about the ranch, the horses, the wide world waiting to be explored. Florence found herself happier than she had ever thought possible. Yes, she had lost her father. Yes, she had been rejected by polite society and forced to rebuild her life from nothing. But in the rebuilding, she had found something genuine and lasting. She had found love based on mutual respect and shared values. She had found a partner who saw her honesty as a strength rather than a flaw. She had found a family. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Marcus began transferring more responsibilities to Wade, teaching him the business side of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over. It became clear that Marcus viewed Wade as the son he never had, and the Rocking M as a legacy he wanted to pass on to people he trusted. "When I die," Marcus said one evening when James was 2 years old, "this ranch goes to you and Florence. It is all arranged with my lawyer. You have made this place a home, and homes should stay with family." Wade tried to protest, but Marcus held up his hand. "Do not argue with an old man. You have earned this, both of you. You work hard, you are honest, and you are raising that boy right. The Rocking M needs people like you." Florence hugged Marcus tightly, this cantankerous old man who had given her a chance when no one else would. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life in more ways than one." "You saved your own life," Marcus corrected. "I just gave you a place to do it." Marcus lived another 3 years, long enough to see Florence give birth to twin daughters in 1882, long enough to watch James learn to ride, long enough to know that his legacy was secure. He died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1883, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch he had loved. Wade and Florence inherited the Rocking M, as promised. They renamed it the Bancroft Ranch in honor of Florence's father, a small act of remembrance that felt right. They built it into one of the most successful ranches in the region, known for quality cattle and, more importantly, for honest dealing. Their reputation spread, and people came from all over to do business with them, trusting that Wade and Florence Brennan would always deal fairly. The town of Marfa slowly changed its opinion of Florence, as towns do when prosperity is involved. The same people who had shunned her began to seek her out, wanting to be associated with success. Florence was polite but distant, never forgetting who had stood by her in her darkest hour and who had turned away. She donated money to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, helped Mr. Rodriguez when he fell on hard times, and maintained relationships with those who had shown her kindness when she had nothing. As for Richard Caldwell's execution, it became a turning point for Marfa. The corruption that had been hidden for so long began to unravel, with investigations revealing years of fraud and embezzlement. The town elected new leadership, people who promised transparency and justice. It was not perfect, but it was better. Florence sometimes thought about how different her life might have been if she had stayed silent that day in the street, if she had chosen comfort over truth. She would have been accepted by polite society, certainly. But she would have lost herself in the process, would have become someone who could live with injustice for the sake of social standing. And she would never have met Wade, never built this life that felt authentic and meaningful. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and showed early promise with horses. The twins, Emma and Sarah, were wild and joyful, constantly into mischief but devoted to each other and their family. Florence and Wade added another son, Samuel, in 1885, and then another daughter, Grace, in 1887. Their cabin expanded into a proper house, with enough rooms for everyone and a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals. It was a good life, built on the foundation of honesty that Wade had promised all those years ago. They taught their children to value truth above convenience, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, to judge people by their character rather than their social standing. They taught them about their grandfather James, who had died for truth, and about Marcus, who had valued integrity above all else. Florence never forgot those early days, the pain and isolation of being rejected for speaking truth. But she also never regretted her choices. Every time she looked at Wade, at their children, at the ranch they had built together, she knew that honesty had been worth the cost. It had brought her to this life, this family, this love that felt as solid and enduring as the Texas hills around them. On their 10th wedding anniversary in February 1889, Wade took Florence back to the spot where he had proposed, in the barn at the old Rockingham. The barn was still standing, though they had built new, larger ones since taking over the ranch. But this place held memories worth preserving. "Do you remember what I told you that day?" Wade asked, taking both her hands in his. "You told me you loved me," Florence said, smiling at the memory. "You told me I was worth courting despite everything." "I told you that you were too honest for polite society," Wade said. "And that honesty is the foundation we would build upon. I want you to know that every day since has proven that true. Everything good in my life comes from the day you chose truth over comfort, even when it cost you everything." Florence felt tears prick her eyes. "Everything good in my life comes from you choosing to stand beside me. You could have stayed silent that day. You could have let me face it alone, but you spoke up and that changed everything." "We saved each other," Wade said simply. "You showed me that truth still matters, even in a world that often seems to value lies. I showed you that honesty deserves to be loved, not punished. Together, we built something real." They stood in the barn where they had first confessed their love, now middle-aged but still devoted, still honest with each other about everything that mattered. Outside, they could hear their children playing, their voices carrying on the wind. The ranch spread around them, prosperous and thriving. The future stretched ahead, full of possibility. Florence had been too honest for polite society, and it had cost her dearly. But in losing the approval of people who valued appearances over truth, she had gained something infinitely more valuable. She had gained a love built on mutual respect, a family raised with integrity, and a life that felt authentic in every way. The cowboy had been right. Honesty was the foundation worth building upon, and everything they had created together proved it. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Florence and Wade walked back to their house hand in hand. Their children ran to meet them, full of stories about their day, demanding attention and affection. Wade scooped up the youngest, Grace, while James helped his mother up the porch steps with exaggerated courtesy that made her laugh. Inside, the house was warm and filled with the sounds of family. Dinner was a chaotic affair, with everyone talking at once, sharing their days, making plans for tomorrow. After the children were in bed, Florence and Wade sat on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the stars and talking about everything and nothing. "I am content," Florence said softly. "I did not think I would ever be able to say that after my father died, but I am. This life we have built, this family, this honesty between us, I am content." "So am I," Wade said, pulling her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Florence Brennan. Too honest for polite society, perhaps, but exactly honest enough for a life well lived." She kissed him then, under the vast Texas sky, in front of the house they had built together. It was a kiss that held 10 years of marriage, 5 children, countless challenges overcome, and a love that had proven stronger than social disapproval or tragedy. It was a kiss that promised many more years to come, built on the same foundation of truth that had brought them together. In the years that followed, the Bancroft Ranch continued to grow and prosper. James eventually took over most of the day-to-day operations, showing the same commitment to honest dealing that his parents had modeled. The twins married good men who valued integrity, and Samuel showed promise as a horse trainer. Grace, the youngest, had her mother's fierce devotion to truth and her father's quiet strength. Florence and Wade grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They never forgot those early days, the pain of loss and rejection, the courage it took to stand by truth when everyone else chose lies. But they also never forgot the joy of finding each other, of building something real and lasting. When Florence was 65, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman from Marfa, the granddaughter of one of the women who had shunned Florence all those years ago, came to the ranch seeking advice. She had witnessed a crime and was being pressured to stay silent, and she had heard the story of Florence Bancroft, the woman who had chosen truth over social acceptance. Florence sat with her on the porch, this young woman who reminded her so much of her younger self, and told her the truth. It will cost you. Speaking truth always does. People will turn against you, call you names, make your life difficult. But staying silent will cost you more. It will cost you your integrity, your self-respect, your ability to look at yourself in the mirror and like who you see. Were you ever sorry? The girl asked. Did you ever regret speaking up? Florence looked out over the ranch at the life she and Wade had built, at the family they had raised. Not once, she said firmly. I lost things I valued when I told the truth. But I gained things I could never have found through lies. I gained real love, real respect, and a real life. That is always worth the cost. The girl left with tears in her eyes but determination in her step. Florence watched her go, hoping she would have the courage to do what was right, knowing that courage would be rewarded in ways she could not yet imagine. That evening, as Florence and Wade sat together watching another sunset, she told him about the visitor. I hope I gave her good advice. You gave her the truth, Wade said. That is the only advice worth giving. Florence leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the comfort of decades spent together. I love you, Wade Brennan. From that first day when you spoke up in the street, I have loved you. And I have loved you, Florence Bancroft Brennan. Too honest for polite society, but exactly honest enough for me. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The ranch settled into its evening rhythms around them, horses whinnying in the distance, cattle lowing in the fields, the sounds of family inside the house. It was a life built on honesty, sustained by love, and enriched by the courage to stand by truth no matter the cost. Florence thought about her father, whose dying words had set her on this path. She thought about Marcus, who had given her a chance when no one else would. She thought about all the people over the years who had told her she should have stayed silent, should have chosen comfort over truth. And she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Honesty had been the foundation they built upon, just as Wade had promised that day in the barn. Everything else, all the love and family and prosperity, had grown from that foundation. It had not been easy, but it had been real. And real was worth more than all the false comfort in the world. As the years continued to pass, Florence and Wade remained devoted to each other and to the principles they had lived by. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch remained successful, known throughout Texas for its integrity and quality. Florence lived to the age of 78, dying peacefully in her sleep with Wade holding her hand. Her last words were about her father, about finally being able to tell him that his death had not been in vain, that justice had been served, that she had lived a life he would be proud of. Wade followed her 6 months later, unable to imagine life without the woman who had been his partner, his love, his moral compass for over 50 years. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that read, "Honest in life, together in death." The Bancroft Ranch remained in the family for generations. Each new generation taught the story of Florence and Wade, of honesty and courage, of choosing truth over comfort. It became a legacy that extended far beyond land and cattle, a legacy of integrity that influenced everyone who heard the story. And in Marfa, the tale of Florence Bancroft became legend. The woman who had been too honest for polite society, who had chosen truth when everyone told her to lie, who had built a life of love and meaning on the foundation of integrity. Young people were told her story as an example of courage, of standing up for what is right regardless of the cost. The cowboy's words, spoken in a cemetery on a hot August day in 1878, proved prophetic. Honesty had been the foundation they built upon, and everything that followed had been stronger and more beautiful because of it. Florence had been too honest for polite society, but she had been exactly honest enough for a life well lived, for a love that endured, and for a legacy that would inspire generations to come. In the end, truth had cost Florence everything she had in the old world, but it gave her everything that mattered in the new one she built. And that, she would have said if she could speak from beyond the grave, was the best trade she ever made.